starting off today's session. I'm starting off today's session with a session on Paul Horiuchi, who was a Japanese artist based out of Seattle. He actually, and I'm going to ask to share my screen. So I'm not, Joe or Teshka, if I can do that.
You should be able to, Robin.
Okay, let's see here. Let's see here. I don't see where, oh. Let me see if I can get this. I'm sorry for this delay.
You can use the same excuse I always do. We're old.
Yes, well, that accounts for a lot. I can't seem to find it. Gosh darn it, and I had lots of photos. Where do I get to? Oh, here's my desktop. Never mind. Let's see if I can get this now. Hang on. Am I?
No.
No.
Not yet. I think your application is probably open, but you just have to click that green share screen button and then
Okay.
choose the right window.
Thanks everyone so much for coming and listening to us. My name is Jenny Wu, and I live in Seattle, where I'm married with 2 kids. My older son is a freshman in college. He graduated from Garfield, High School, and then I have a freshman who is currently at Roosevelt High School. So I'm a second generation Taiwanese American. I moved to Seattle in 2001. I'm also an engineer at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, where I work on water pollution. So as we all know, the umbrella of Asian America is really big, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about everyone's experience on this panel. I'm obviously here just to talk about my own experience. So thank you for, again, listening to my own experience. So one of the unusual things about me is that I was born in a really small town in Southern Illinois in 1972. So in this town, there were 3 Asian American families. There's 1 Chinese American guy, and there was my family. And my town was a really small farming community. We had 16,000 people who lived there. My dad worked there for the Illinois State of Agriculture as a virologist. My mom worked there as a nurse at the hospital. They had come to the US from Taiwan in the late 60s, and that was part of that Hart-Celler Act, or the Immigration Act of 1965. So again, back to my town. My town it's the biggest town in the area. It's got 16,000 people, but it's actually the biggest town. All those surrounding towns, had a few thousand, a few hundred people. We're separated by a lot of corn, soybean fields. So it's not a college, like a big college community. It's not like a suburb of Chicago. So it's very much rural, middle America. And it was in 1972 when I was born. My parents moved there, I think in 71 or something like that. So it's kind of like, the Vietnam War is still going on, and it's just like 30 years after World War II. So that's just kind of the backdrop. So I was going to speak to one of my parents' first experiences there when they bought their first house, maybe a couple of years in after they moved there. So one of the first things that my parents' neighbors had done is my parents told me this, when they first moved into their neighborhood, when the neighbors first heard that my parents, who were Asian American, were going to live in the neighborhood, they built up a fence. So in my town, there were like no fences. Everything is like free. There was one family that had a fence, but other than that, there were like no fences. So so that happened when I heard about my parents. But the really cool thing is that that family took down that fence about a week after my parents moved in and they'd met my parents. And I think that had to do with my parents were this sort of cute young couple. And it was my sister and me, we're just two little girls, you know, and I think they realized, you know, like, huh, wait a second, you know, these people are actually all right. They're not that different. They're just this young family. So we actually became very, very good friends with them. We visit their house all the time. They brought us gifts from their trips, all sorts of things like that. Some other things about my experience there is, you know, we had our next door neighbors were actually 4 different pastors of different denominations of churches. My parents are Buddhist. So anyway, it was just very different backgrounds, but we became really good friends with each other. So it was just a very interesting experience living in that small town, because I think you just, you know, I think at least in our community, we just got to know each other. And I kind of didn't really realize this until I was older, that, you know, we had friends who, they were gun owners, or they're doctors, or they worked in the factory. There was a candy factory there. They're teachers and police officers. And so, I mean, it was just a, you know, very interesting, like different people that we became friends with. And so, and don't get me wrong, it wasn't perfect or anything. And I was definitely called many Asian slurs and had, you know, different things that happened. Just not, anyway, just growing up at that time. So, but from that standpoint of getting to know people and becoming close to many people on an individual level, it was just, you know, it was a really special and a very good experience, I guess, that I had. I had a lot of really wonderful memories. Okay, so now shifting, when I was 10, my family actually did a total 180 and they moved to Southern California, where I was also called different Asian slurs actually. But anyway, even some ones I had never actually heard of before. But anyway, it was definitely like the opposite of living in the Midwest. And so, you know, I think my dad, he kind of hit a glass ceiling. I think he also had a midlife crisis at that time. And he decided he just didn't want to work in a lab all his life. So we moved to Southern California and bought an ice cream store. So anyway, so Southern California was just totally different, right, from the small town in Illinois. So just in addition to obviously like being totally different weather and my parents having completely new types of jobs and just moving to a big city, there were so many Asian American families. And it was just pretty amazing to me, because back in Illinois, when I was younger, if there was an Asian American family that was like in a 50-mile radius, we'd go and we would like meet them immediately and become kind of friends with them. So, you know, here was this experience where there were tons of people who looked like me. And as a young girl, I assumed they'd be as excited to meet me as I was them. But of course, that wasn't the case, you know. I mean, I remember getting some funny looks when I was super excited as a young girl, just meeting people, and then you know, they were just not as enthusiastic, and it was just very different from when we were in a small town, and people usually brought over cookies with neighbors, and we didn't get to know our neighbors as well, just because I think there were so many people, right, moving in. And I think to some extent, people kind of stuck to their own groups, because, you know, it's a little bit easier. It's like, why get to know other people when you can hang out with people who kind of look like you? And so it was just different. But as time went by, I definitely appreciated moving to California, because, you know, just growing up where there was a larger Asian American community, I didn't always have to be the only one in the classroom kind of thing of being Asian. I didn't have to represent everything. I met tons of people from different backgrounds, just exposed to so many different things. I obviously learned a lot about Asian American history and civil rights and racism and gender. And just, I think, interestingly, I think in a bigger community, there are just also recognition of larger movements and And I don't know if I would have had that same kind of education in that smaller town. I mean, maybe I would have, but I don't know. I don't know if that would have happened. So just sort of closing, like, I feel super grateful to have lived in a small town, because I really learned sometimes it is just about connecting with people on an individual level and realizing, okay, these people, they don't look like me, but we actually have a lot of things in common. I think it's really important to have that personal connection. And there's so much right, mistrust and hate and different things that are happening in our country nowadays. So sometimes connecting on an individual level, and just the way that, Rare is doing those sorts of things, I think it's really important. But I'm also really grateful for living in a big community, because I just think it's really important to be part of these larger movements. And there's a lot of power in being part of that. So I'll just touch real briefly on a few things I did in college, and then just some things I'm doing now as well. So in college, I definitely, worked a lot in environmental justice in the San Francisco Chinatown. And I also worked on this Asian American Women's Journal, where we published these annual kind of different writings and poetry and stories and different things like that. And now I am working on Roosevelt's Race and Equity PTA committee. It's got some fantastic parents on it. And it's just been really great to be able to work with Rare and also work with all these other parents who are just really fantastic and really care about the community. And at my work, I work in the environmental field, and frankly, in the Pacific Northwest, it is, pretty white in the environmental fields here. So I'm part of these efforts to on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, to kind of have better outreach and partnering with different organizations and schools.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. We've got 5 minutes for questions for Jenny.
Thanks.
Questions? You have to raise your hand with the emoji thing. Did you listen to Robin? I have a question. You have a freshman daughter at Roosevelt High School today. What challenges do you think she has as an Asian American or student?
Yeah, it's a son, and but I think at Roosevelt's, I think he's actually enjoying his time there, but I think there have been a lot of different issues linked to race and that are sort of problematic in the school. So it'll be interesting to work on, I guess, some different ways to kind of have kids feel like they're in a safe place to talk about sort of different issues, that are going on in the school.
Yeah,
So,
good.
Sorry,
good,
that was
good.
a bit general.
Okay, Cherry. Unmute.
Aloha, Jenny. I see in you this. I love your smile. One of the things growing up here in the States as a Asian Pacific Islander is that we're very good at smiling when when there's pain. And my question for you is, do you believe your children's experiences at school are better than yours and your parents? Thank you.
It's interesting. I think that's multi-layered. It was hard to prepare for this and think about what to cover. I think there's a lot of benefits to being part of a bigger community and with a larger Asian community. But it is really interesting. I think when you go to some places, it doesn't matter if you're my parents who immigrated here, or me, where I speak some Taiwanese, and my kids who don't speak any, Taiwanese or Mandarin. And to some people, we'll all be the same, right? They'll all kind of perceive us as the same thing, and maybe they just won't like us, right, for whatever reason. And we've definitely, I don't know. Anyway, gotten some funny looks sometimes where you're sort of like, why is that person treating me? Yeah, just kind of like like they don't like me kind of thing. And I don't know, maybe they're just having a bad day. Who knows what's happening? But like, so I don't, it's kind of hard to say. I do think things are getting better, but I do think there's just a lot for us to have to still, there's a lot of work that's still left.
Okay, thank you, Jenny.
Thanks.
Thank you for being on the PTA too. Okay, Maggie.
Yeah, it's great you're on the race and equity committee with the PTA, and I'm just curious how you think RARE and that PTA committee can work together. I don't know anything how, maybe they already do. Maybe you can tell me how they already work together and then what you'd like to see.
Yeah, I think there are a number of things that the PTA group is trying to do. So I think we're, really trying to look at supporting students, but we're also looking at how to build a better sort of parent community to connect them to different, kind of ways if people want to get engaged more. How do we do that? And RARE is so wonderful because, right, it's got the community aspect from it. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to actually being able to connect some of the types of discussions that are going on with RARE, and for us to be able to engage the parent community a little bit more, maybe just through some more of a social media presence, or just even getting the word out amongst our friends. Just word of mouth is super powerful.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Jenny. Let's give her a hand. Okay, are we ready to go now, Robin?
We're going to go old school because it's loading. It's trying to load, but it's taking forever. So this will be a short presentation because I don't have any of the slides or the photos of Paul Horiyuchi, but it's really an interesting life. He was born in Japan on August 12th, 1906, and he was known as Chikamasa Horiyuchi. 40 days after he was born, his father emigrated to the United States to find work. And he got a job in Wyoming working for the Union Pacific Railroad. 3 years later, his mother left Japan to join her husband in Wyoming. And so Chikamasa and his older brother went to live with an older cousin, Shigetoshi Horiyuchi. In 1910, when he was only 4 years old, his cousin left Japan to go to the United States to reunite with the family. So then they were sent to live with their paternal grandfather. So while he was growing up in Japan until the age of 14, he took 3 years of art lessons, and he became extremely proficient in calligraphy and that kind of art. He was not only a good artist, but he was an exceptional runner, and he was good enough to be considered for the Olympic team. But he dropped out of competition when it was found out that he had a heart murmur. When he was 12, then his brother left him to go to the United States and reunite with his parents in Wyoming. So 2 years later, he finally left Japan at 14 to join his nuclear family in Wyoming. By this time, his parents had 3 other younger children in Wyoming. They were ages 3, 7, and 8. So a year after he finally was reunited with both of his parents and his new siblings that he had just met and his older brother, his father died of stomach cancer at the age of 44. So almost immediately after, his mother returned to Japan permanently with the 3 younger children. So Chikamasa and his older brother who was now going by the name of Tom, remained in Wyoming. And they were only like 15 and 17. They both got jobs working for the railroad. And by the age of 17, Chikamasa advanced to foreman on the railroad. And he actually learned to speak Spanish before he learned to speak English because of all the Hispanic workers on the railroad. So he was actually trilingual by the time he finally learned English. During this time, he decided he was going to commit himself to art, even though he couldn't yet make a living in it. And so he did a lot of oils and a lot of watercolors. And then I have several watercolor photos to show you, but you won't see those. He also did a lot of art in using oils, and he did some beautiful portraits, self-portraits and portraits of his wife. His cousin introduced him to Bernadette Suda. Bernadette was born in the United States. They were married on June 11th, 1935. After they got married, Chicamasa converted to Catholicism, which was Bernadette. She went by Bernie, was Bernie's religion, and he changed his name to Paul. And not for St. Paul, he changed his name in honor of Paul Cézanne. Because Paul and Bernie lived in Wyoming when World War II broke out, they were outside of that Washington, Oregon, California, West Coast area where Japanese nationals and Japanese Americans were shipped off to 10 forsaken camps of incarceration. But because he was in Wyoming, he was not part of that. However, before the internment camps were even opened on February 22nd, 1941, all Japanese workers for the railroad were fired by Union Pacific, and they were given 24 hours to vacate their company-owned houses. So they were ordered to turn in all their guns, all their ammunition, and all their cameras, as were all the Japanese nationals and Japanese Americans on the West Coast. So Paul and Bernie packed up everything they could in their car, and both Paul and his brother Tom burned everything that reminded them or that could be identified as Japanese. They burned all their books, they burned all their letters and correspondences, they burned their photographs, and they burned Paul's paintings because they didn't want anyone to think that they would use any of these things against them. So it was incredibly hard to find jobs and find a place to live. All of their friends that they had made in Seattle were all incarcerated, and it was even harder for them because even though they were not part of that West Coast area, most of the people in Wyoming thought they should have been incarcerated. So it was very hard to find a job. They couldn't find a place to rent. Finally, an African-American person allowed them to clean up his chicken coop, and they hung a sheet in the chicken coop, and Paul and his family lived on one side, and Tom and his family lived on the other side. So they tried to find different jobs. During the war, he did find work in Nebraska, harvesting sugar beets. He worked as a miner. He worked in a tannery company in Ogden, Utah. He worked as an electrician, a janitor, and a gardener. Bernie was raising 2 young boys at this time, and she occasionally brought in laundry in order to supplement. Things were so hard, trying to survive, that he actually petitioned the US government to be able to move to Minidoka internment camp, because he thought at least that way they would have food on the table and a roof over their heads, even though it would be a barrack. Ironically, the US government said no. So they were on their own. After the war, Paul found work doing auto body work in Spokane. And then they moved to Seattle in 1946. By this time, they had 2 sons, Paul Jr. and John. And quite a few years later, after they moved to Seattle, they had a 3rd son named Vincent. He injured his arm pretty severely working in his auto body shop, which ended that career. So he opened up an antique shop on East Pike Street. Because Bernie was born in the United States, they were able to purchase a home under her name. Japanese were not able to purchase real estate in Washington State until 1966. Paul used his auto body work as inspiration for a lot of his metal sculpture. Although he's not known for his metal sculptures, he did quite a few of them. My dad met Paul Horiuchi because he took his cars to the auto shop, and even if nothing was wrong with any of my dad's vehicles, he would hang out there just because he thought this man who was very talented was so interesting. And he was working out of a minuscule studio that he had made out of this auto body shop. Even though he couldn't do the work of auto repair anymore, he was still using that small space as a studio. So my dad offered him a storefront in the apartment house that we lived in on Stewart Street. And if you've ever taken the Stewart Street exit, the freeway, going to downtown, the apartment house I grew up in was 2 blocks off the off of the freeway. So the building's been long gone, but that's how I got to know him, because, you know, after school, you just go out there and hang out and watch him paint and do his thing. And he was always very, very kind. And he always had a huge mess, which was fun. And he'd let you tear up his papers, because by this time he had found his niche in the art world doing collages, and they were mostly neutral color. Sometimes they had a little splash of red. They were all done with rice paper and lots of calligraphy in it. And he was very, very kind. He didn't care if you spent an hour tearing up his rice papers, because he would always find a scrap that he needed, just that size and just that shape. So I always remember him as being very, very kind and very generous. He did collages that were very small, maybe, you know, 3 inches by 4 inches, but he also did collages that were shown in galleries that were like 8 feet by 10 feet, gigantic ones. Probably his largest art and his only public artwork was the mural that he was commissioned to do for the 1962 Seattle World's Fair. And we're talking about that great big glass mosaic mural that's in front of the Space Needle. He actually went to Italy to source the glass, and then he partitioned off this big mural into sections, and they were shipped to Seattle. My dad was part of the crew that installed the panels onto the framework in front of the Space Needle, and they got it done the night before the first day of the fair, the Seattle World's Fair. And I remember my dad making us wait for hours to be able to ride the monorail on the first day of the fair, so we could ride the monorail to the Seattle Fair and see the mural, which is even today beautiful. I saw a YouTube video that Paul's great nephew did, and they had a reunion in front of the mural, and they said because it was such high quality glass, the colors are just as vibrant as they were in 1962. So if you get a chance to go there, it's very inspiring. And I don't know how big it is, but it's got to be maybe 60 feet across and 15 feet high. It's huge. His last collage has lots of color. It has lots of blues and oranges and greens, and it's a huge divergence from his basic palette of neutral colors. It does have a lot of calligraphy in it, but the one thing that none of his other collages have is he incorporated 2 photographs. One photograph looks like a person, but it's actually a coat rack with a hat and a coat, man's overcoat on it. And below that is a photograph of a white wall with an open door. And so it evokes images of somebody going on a trip somewhere. Within a week of completing this collage, Paul entered Cairo House, which is a nursing home for those of Japanese descent in Seattle, and he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Shortly after moving into the nursing house, he reverted to verbalizing only in Japanese. He lived another 3 years in Cairo House and died on August 29th, 1999 at the age of 93. Today, there's a very small little park on Bourne Avenue. I like to call it the wrong side of Bourne because I lived on the downtown side of Bourne Avenue, just a couple blocks away. And this is on the south side of Bourne Avenue, close to the Japanese Baptist Church and the Buddhist temple. So it's on 156 Bourne Avenue if you want to go visit. It's just a small little park, just maybe, an eighth of a city block, but it's beautiful. It's grass and trees, and if you can ignore the traffic of Bourne Avenue, lots of birds hang out there, and it's really lovely. It's a great place just to remember Paul Horiuchi. If you were interested in his art and his contemporaries, like John Matsudaira and Ken Nomura, Tokita Kanoshita, Morisawa, and George Tsutakawa, they can be found, examples of their work are at the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle and the Seattle Asian Art Museum. And then if you look on the website for Asian art and ways to spread the word, there are dozens and dozens of websites that you can check out. And this was one of the ones I was hoping to share with you, but I can maybe share it later on. But anyway, that's Paul Horiuchi in a nutshell.
Thank you,
And-
Robin. We got 5 minutes for questions for Robin. Anybody? Raise your hand. Emoji. Oh, it's Cherry again.
Aloha. Thank you so much for presenting about Mr. Horiuchi. I was looking at his work that Natalia shared a link with us. And I wonder, as a child, what would you say is the most precious memory that you have of Mr. Horiuchi? Thank you.
Just being in his studio and him letting me rip his rice paper to shreds, and then saying, "Oh, this is just the size I needed," and he would use it, you know. And I mean, who does that? You know, that to me is my most precious memory. When I was in the 4th grade, we all had to do a biography. So I asked him if I could interview him, and he said yes, but not here. And so he had my dad bring me to his house, and his wife Bernie had cookies and lemonade, and he spent like an hour and a half just talking to me. Such a generous, spirited, kind man.
Okay, Robin, thank you. Let's give Robin a hand. Good job, Robin. And now we have Teshka Hatch. Teshka.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Robin. I really loved hearing that story. Hello, everyone. My name's Teshka Hatch. I want to do things a little bit differently. I wrote out some notes, and so I'm gonna try to do my best to kind of tell my story, but also I want to come into this space as a mixed race Asian person, but also I want to highlight a little bit of what it means to be a non-Black person of color in this fight for racial equity and justice. So what does it mean to be a person of color or POC, but also what does it mean to be non-Black, and how can we center Blackness while we're talking about our own experiences and while we're fighting towards racial justice. So I would say that my story is really about bridges, navigating opposing worlds and trying to understand my place in these different worlds, and then attempting to really use my positionality as a bridge to bring these worlds together. So as a mixed race person, I'll share a little bit about how I was often kind of moving through different worlds, but how that also kind of led to my own identity development. And if positionality is a new world, please do write it down, Google it later. It's a term that I use a lot and think about a lot, just because I think it's really important to think about how we enter spaces and how we show up in spaces, how we really recognize our own identities, and how we can impact or influence different spaces that we navigate. So I grew up in a biracial, binational, bicultural, bilingual household. I spent the first 8 years of my life in the south end of Seattle, so in Beacon Hill, among really families of just really every type of background. Our family next door was a Filipino family. My closest friends growing up were mixed race Filipino Japanese, a redhead boy, a mixed race Chinese Japanese girl. I had a Mexican friend, a biracial Black white boy, Japanese white, etc. There was just a lot of different people in my class growing up. So I also grew up going to Japanese school every Saturday. So it was Monday through Saturday, all day of school. And then at the age of 8, my family decided to move us to Japan to be closer to my grandfather, and then also to be fully immersed in my mom's culture. So I spent 4 years going to public school in Japan, and for the first time really learning that I was different, and starting to kind of understand what different could be. We got a lot of stares. People were pointing to us in the subways. We were often called gaijin, or a foreigner, over and over. But this is where I think I learned a little bit of who I was, not just learning to appreciate my culture and my Japanese values, but becoming more comfortable in my own identity. Just even as, you know, a 10-year-old, I was realizing that I was someone who really loved to bring people together, to organize karaoke or karaoke parties, invite all of my friends over from my 4th grade class. At the age of 12, our family moved back to Seattle. And instead of moving back to the south end to Beacon Hill, we actually moved to the north end. And so my dad wanted to move us closer to where he grew up. he enrolled me in the what seemed like the all-white Eckstein Middle School, and my sister into Roosevelt. And this was a time where I was still trying to relearn my English. I had lost my English completely. And I couldn't really communicate with anyone, but suddenly I was in a sea of all white spaces or faces, completely out of my element. So not being able to use my English effectively, I noticed myself kind of falling into these racist stereotypes of this quiet Asian girl. And I was, I was the kid who was just lending my classmates pencils and letting them copy my homework. And that was, I felt like I was kind of reduced to that person or that persona. Graduating from Exeter, enrolling in Roosevelt was probably worse. The awkward middle school days might have been over, but even though I had regained most of my English, it became even more in your face obvious that Roosevelt was not only a sea of white faces, but also really a popularity contest rooted entirely on race and class. And I'll note that I'm a little bit younger than a lot of the folks in this room. I did graduate in 2006. So this is a Roosevelt High School 15 years ago. So compared to some of our, I guess, colleagues on RARE's board, the Roosevelt 15 years ago is very different from the Roosevelt 50 years ago, but I would say that it was probably whiter 15 years ago than it was 50 years ago. So this was a really, really tough place for me, where really I was trying to navigate race and class, and I was trying to act like I was above it all, I was really walking around self-conscious about, my North Face look-alike fleece. It wasn't an actual North Face, because everyone that was cool and popular had a real North Face. So it was really, about class, not just race. My sister was somehow able to rise above it all. She wasn't really interested in blending in. She thrived more on being in the spotlight through vocal jazz and drama, and somehow still best friends with all the cheerleaders. But I despised it. I hated it all. So I decided to transfer to Garfield. So any Bulldogs in the house? Sorry, y'all. I did end up going to Garfield and loving Garfield. It was really like my saving grace. I found people who look like me, but even more so, I would say I found people who look nothing like me, finding opportunities to connect and engage in genuine dialogue with other people who looked nothing like them. And I was suddenly able to think more clearly, breathe in more deeply, and just simply exist in a way that felt authentic. Garfield 15 years ago is similar to today in that it is a tale of two schools, incredibly diverse and incredibly segregated. But it was where I feel like I found my voice and I became more grounded in my identity. So this is now becoming a long story of like my personal journey, but the last little piece is that I took this voice with me to a predominantly white liberal arts school in upstate New York. And for those who have spent any time on the East Coast, it is completely different, especially when it comes to the Asian American experience. So I was angry and combative for pretty much my entire 4 years at Skidmore College. But it was really here that I started to develop my identity, no longer as just a mixed race Asian person, but more so as simply a non-white person of color. Living on the East Coast among a sea of wealthier white people who mostly attended private prep schools in the suburbs of Connecticut, New Jersey, Massachusetts, I started to relate more to my Black, Dominican, and Puerto Rican friends from New York City. So I felt like we were together in this fight against white supremacy and collectively using our voices to advocate for marginalized communities. And I share all of this because looking back onto this time now, I can see really that my otherness as a mixed race Asian person was probably the same exact thing that kept me from seeing my privilege as a mixed race Asian and white person. So in most of my professional career, I would say that I've been put in places where I'm either seen as one of the few people of color, one of the few POCs, or I'm asked to speak on behalf of other people of color. And yet, as a person who was raised by a white man from the Laurelhurst neighborhood in Seattle and a Japanese immigrant from Tokyo, I know nothing about what it's like to live in this country with darker skin. And so this is kind of like really what I wanted to highlight is that, I'm never racially profiled in a way where I fear for my life, particularly when we're talking about officers who are meant to serve and protect us. I'm never seen as intimidating to strangers, even if my assertiveness as a mixed Asian woman is a bit off-putting or surprising to some. And I've never had to worry whether my success in life is questioned based on the color of my skin. I experience all types of microaggressions, don't get me wrong, and I constantly have to deal with the feelings of being othered, but this is nothing in comparison to the racism that our Black and Brown friends have to deal with every single day. In fact, I feel like I've had to deal with my own rage, my own internal rage, as I try to educate my Asian family members on their anti-Black racism. So I guess kind of in conclusion, I just want to share a little bit of what the experience was like for me when I was asked to sit on this panel. I paused. I was actually quite thrown off. And the reason, partly, first of all, is because we know that there's no such thing as the Asian American experience, right? Jenny already said that really well. I think we know how massive the continent of Asia is. And I also hope that we can understand that there's quite a bit of ethnicism when it comes to who we mean when we say Asian. As a society, we're so used to thinking about East Asians, so Chinese, Japanese, South Koreans, and rarely Southeast Asians, sometimes Vietnamese, but almost never Laotian, Cambodian, Thai. And we rarely ever include South Asians in the conversation around Asian American experience. So I could really go down a rabbit hole of frustrations about categorizations, but and how this all ties into the model minority myth, right? And that's a whole separate conversation, dialogue, discussion to have, a whole education experience of talking about how each Asian experience is completely different, and how we as a race don't recognize the different experiences within different ethnicities. But I think the other piece that I really want to highlight is, I lost my train of thought here, is that at this day and age, it's really about the privileges and the power, the societal power that comes with being non-Black in this country, and in particular Asian in this country. We can identify as people of color, we can talk about all the ways in which we've been oppressed, and those are absolutely real. We absolutely have experienced different types of oppression. But today, I think what I really want to highlight is, as we are seeing anti-Asian hate and experiencing America's xenophobia against Asian people, especially with the surge after the start of the pandemic, we still need to talk about what we are doing as non-Black people of color in this country to fight against anti-Blackness. So how are we standing up against it? Even in the midst of anti-Asian hate, how are we ensuring that we're not perpetuating the same narrative? And really, how are we standing in solidarity? So our Asian aunties and uncles need us, but even more, I think we need to, again, stand in solidarity, recognize the ways in which Asian hate and anti-Blackness is all rooted in white supremacy. And it is the tool of white supremacy that is attempting to break us apart, to pit us against each other, and try to kind of put us on this pedestal of who has it worse. So in closing, I think I just would like to say that I hope that we can use our time together not to really wallow in the pains of what it means to be Asian in this country, but instead recognize our power, privileges, and again, our positionality as Asian people in the fight for racial justice.
Thank you, Teshka. We got 5 minutes for questions for Teshka. Questions? Oh, it's Cherry again.
Aloha, Jessica. Thank you so much for bringing up the positionality. My question for you is, I have 2 daughters. They're 10 and 14 years old, and they're both multiracial. And I wonder what advice you could give to that 10 and 14-year-old, because I'm having a hard time, for example, in situations their father is white, and if there is something that happens in their school, even though I am a kindergarten teacher in the same school district, when asked to go to the office, I feel dismissed, whereas their father can go in and take care of the matter. And so I'm very well aware of the white privilege, and I realize the privileges my children and myself have with a white person in the family. So I wonder what advice you would give. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know like where to start and where to begin, because there's so much that I feel like I could say, and truly wish that my dad was here, because this is something that we talk about all the time. I think as a white man, he does recognize, his privileges in all these different ways, and similarly, having access to different people in more powerful positions, and especially like at schools. I have noticed my mom being silenced or ignored at the store. It happened all the time. I actually started to notice myself talking over her as a way to try to kind of smooth over things, because, oh, her English is not very good. And I think my advice would be, without knowing your kids well, right, that it's really about kind of not attempting to be someone or something that you're not. I think as mixed race people, we're trying to find our home. We're trying to find our box. We're trying to find, the world that we really love to exist in. And it's hard. It's almost impossible, I think, because we're always kind of navigating different worlds. There's never going to be a place where you truly feel like you belong. And so I guess my hope is that as mixed race people, we can find our own confidence in ourselves as a way to feel a sense of belonging. And in truly in that, I do feel like I've been able to kind of bring people together because there is an ability to kind of, move through different spaces. I can pass as being white. I can pass in some places as being Asian. And I think that there's an ability to kind of connect. But then also, yeah, to recognize kind of all that comes with that, to recognize the power, and to also recognize that it's sometimes really hard, and it sucks to not have a place where you feel like you can turn to. But I was grateful I had siblings also. And so it was really great to be able to talk about things together.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because one of my daughters looks more white. The other
Mhm.
daughter looks more Asian. And so this is this paradigm I'm having to talk to them about positionality. So I do appreciate your time.
Yeah. And culture, and like, it's not just race, right? It's culture, it's language, it's all these different things. And there's just, again, there's no one way to define who you are. So I hope that they can kind of, learn their own identity through different experiences.
Okay, Jane.
Hi, Teshta. My name is Jane. I am a mom of 2 young kids also in the Laurelhurst neighborhood. And they are not mixed race, but our challenges right now is trying to instill in them pride for their culture, and like learning Korean. And, we're seeing so much more representation in media and in books and everything. And then balancing that with solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters. And just like, I think it's so complicated. And these are things that I didn't need to think about as a Korean American kid growing up in Southern California, where I didn't really feel like a minority. But I think that also had so much to do with why I wasn't able to see that privilege until much, much later. So I guess my question to you would be, what can Asian American parents do today, raising kids to be a little bit more mindful than maybe we were, because our parents didn't have that privilege?
Yeah, I love this. And I actually love one of the words that you use, which is pride. I really think that pride is probably I want to say that is like the number one thing that can lead to empathy and understanding and solidarity, right? I think that in our society, especially as Asian Americans, and especially newer immigrants, I think there's a desire to assimilate. And in that assimilationism, we end up losing not only our culture and identity, but then wanting to be white. And especially if y'all are in Laurelhurst, that is a tough place to see, like truly see and be seen, be heard as a Korean American child, right? Because, and this is my experience at Eckstein and Roosevelt, I felt like I had to kind of blend in, and I felt like I had to lose my own self in order to blend in. And what that ends up doing is that you become closer to whiteness in some ways, where you start to kind of take on I think the characteristics of white supremacy truly. And in turn, that kind of pushes you away from the ability to be grounded in that solidarity. That's just what I think. I'm not an expert at this at all, but I do feel like, that pride that you mentioned, understanding your culture, not everyone has to learn the language or to learn all the cultural values, but once you can be confident and sure in your own self-identity and not have to feel like you have to assimilate into whiteness, I do feel like you will start to develop more empathy and be able to really stand in solidarity.
I love that. Thank you.
Okay, let's give Teshka a hand. Thank you, Teshka. And now we have Cherry. Instead of asking questions, it's your turn to talk.
Okay. Aloha. Because I'm on my phone, I'm on Camino Island with my family on the holidays, so I may have to turn my video off because my reception's not the best. But if you don't see me, I will be right back, but you will hear me. Thank you. Aloha, my name is Cherry Teresa Holmes, and this is my story. So throughout history, Asian American Pacific Islanders have made significant contributions to our country in achieving the American dream. When the Philippines became a US colony, thousands of us Filipinos served in the US Navy in return for citizenship. My uncle, my mother's brother, was an immigrant recruited by the US Navy. He served on a ship with my Native Hawaiian father. And so my legacy came to be after my uncle introduced his sister to my father. I currently chair the Washington State PTA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And my focus is engaging our voices in equity and inclusion for every child. I'm a parent and teacher whose passion for racial justice comes from a lived experience as a marginalized Filipino immigrant and Native Hawaiian. My current struggles are no different than when I graduated in '96, 25 years ago, to your experience 15 years ago at Roosevelt High School. I was born in the Philippines, and I went to an elementary and middle school at the International School in Manila. And I came to the United States when I was 14 and graduated in '96. So I'm sorry, I lost my thought. So I came to the United States because my Native Hawaiian father was stationed in Seattle, and we had military housing. And I also came through a academic scholarship where I attended Seattle Lutheran High School, and it was predominantly white and upper class. I definitely felt being the outsider, not only because of race, but also class. It's very interesting because my parents wanted to keep me from going to a public school per se, because they wanted me to feel more included. So my school would have been in West Seattle, Chief South High School. And I didn't get to experience a public school experience in here in the United States, but I did decide I wanted to make a difference. I love children, and I became a kindergarten teacher. So I got my master's at the University of Washington. And one of the things that has always been that I carry with me, that has been thought of as a barrier, but to me, English is my third language. So I cherish that I can communicate with my parents, and so I just kind of carried that on my shoulders, that was a disparity. When I went to the University of Washington, I was told, well, maybe you should be a part of the EOP program. And the EOP program, I loved the camaraderie that I had with everyone. Equal opportunity program, I felt finally, for the first time in the educational system, a welcoming presence at the UW. And so I learned to face adversity by, I guess I would say, and this is really hard for me because I'm not used to talking about myself and my struggles, because in my work with racial justice, it's all about helping others. But I guess it would just be, my adversity would be that I'm beginning to overcome these stigmas of who I am. And so thank you. Sorry, I'm back.
Anybody have questions for Cherry?
Oh.
Thank you, Cherry.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yep. When I raise my hand, you can't
I
see
didn't
it.
even see it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's my hand is coming up. It's brown, so you can't see it. I don't know if that means anything, but you guys, but I did have it raised. But Cherry, I just wanted to say I'm just impressed. You said English is your third language.
Yes. Yes.
And I take you speak a lot better than individuals where the English is their only language. Uh-oh.
Oh, thank you. Thank
I'm
you.
not sure what happened to my screen here.
I guess being told that, well, I don't understand you. And one of the experiences that is really hard for me to share, but that I feel is important to be told is, so I went to teach in the Seattle School District. And one of my first experiences as a new teacher was my white principal was saying that the white students' parents, and I don't know if it was one or more, had said, Cherry, you kind of want to tone down your accent because we're worried, kindergarten is the first experience in elementary school, and we want to make sure they understand you. And I think I always carry that, like, well, do people really understand me? Because and it makes me want to work that much harder. So thank you. Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Cherry. Let's give Cherry a hand. Everybody. Oh boy. I'm over here trying to figure out how to do this next section. I guess I'm up. If you guys notice, females dominate this session tonight. And that's true. As far as my experience, it's all about the women. The women run the show. Okay. And in my household, the women is my boss, my wife. So it was my honor to have these four young ladies, share their story. Now it's my turn, and I'm gonna share screen. Whoa, share screen. It says host disabled participant screening.
Sorry, Alan, it should be available now.
Oh, okay. Okay, can everybody see that? Yes, no? Yes, I can't hear. Anyway, this is my topic. And in case what I wanted to do was get my whole talk on chat so you guys could take it home with you. Because I'm gonna run through this whole thing real quickly. And how do I do a message? Hold on, everyone. Okay, does everybody have my message down there? In chat? Anyway, it's this is essentially my whole talk. Current events. This Saturday, we essentially had a real big event here in Virginia Beach. I'm a member of the Filipino American National Historical Society, and we founded a chapter here in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and we had a very, very historical event on Saturday. And for the first time, the state of Virginia but they produced a historical marker so that people know Filipinos exist here in Virginia Beach, which I thought was pretty cool. So if you click on that, you'll see the press. You'll even see the whole ceremony if you guys want to go through all that. But I just put that up there so you guys could see what's up real quick. Now, as far as the Filipino American history class, let's see if I can do this. Can you guys see my share screen? Is it the same one?
Yeah. Can you enlarge it?
It's too small. Print's too
Anyway.
small.
Okay, look at it in the
Alan.
chat. It's too small. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if anything, the Seattle Public, here we go. Seattle Public School is, we have Filipino American histories being taught in the Seattle Public Schools. And if anything, I want rare, if you guys remember the PTA, or if you guys have been any influence, or if you have grandkids in school, have them fill this out and take the class. And if anything, that's what I want you to get out of this whole talk. So let me get back to here. Am I back to the original here, Teshka? Okay. Now, the more exposure or contact that people had to groups who were different from them, they are less likely they would maintain prejudice. And that's how I started. This is me. A lot of you, well, first of all, I'm very, very, usually my audience is way younger than you guys. I feel very comfortable talking to a lot of high school kids, a lot of college kids, because I have no accent. And I'm their parents' age. They think I'm their parent, because here on the East Coast, you have to know the immigration patterns. 80% of the Filipino American population came after 1965. And because of that, here on the East Coast, when I started back in 83, 84, that's when a lot of the kids started to the kids started to enter school in their high school years and their college years. And when they heard me talk, I had no accent, being their parents' age, that just kind of freaked them out. But essentially, back in 1970, I didn't know what I was. I thought I was Black, because I'd never been to the Philippines. I was born and raised in Seattle. I was from the Central area, and I got bussed out to Roosevelt. And I very, very distinctly remember, and Joe Hunter was there too, the very, very first Black student meeting at Roosevelt High School was back in 1971. And I wanted to go. And James Davis said, no, you can't go because you ain't Black. I said, wait a minute, man. I'm as Black as you, my brother. But no, he was right. I had to think about that. And, you know, he was right. And right then it started to dawn on me, if I'm not Black enough to be Black, and if I'm not white enough to be white, and I'm not really Filipino because I've never been there, and I don't even speak the language. So what am I? And so there was a journey. A lot of people feel that my brownness was a hindrance in white spaces or even Black spaces, but it was my saving grace to be brown, to be Filipino. And so I wanted to share with you a very, very quick, I guess, presentation of the history of how we found history. And the definition of how we define history is on this prologue, where we believe Filipino American history is more than the awareness of events, the remembrance of deaths, and the memorization of dates. As descendants of colorful and courageous pioneers, we believe their inspirational stories are worth studying and preserving. Why not learn and discover Filipino American history from the makers of our history? Therefore, we choose to explore the lives of our pioneers by celebrating how they lived, how they survived, how they built families, how they endured, how they felt in making America our home. We believe Filipino American history starts at home with family history, the price our parents paid in the past for the freedoms we, their children, enjoy. And so basically my whole rap to all my students over the years was Filipino American history is American history. And before you could take pride in being Filipino American, you have to know first Filipino American history. Before we can be incorporated in American history books and American history classes, you have to know first Filipino American history. The three most important factors to remind and reinforce in the minds of all Americans that we are here, that we are Americans, is history, history, history. And throughout the 80s, it's like, well, shoot, who's supposed to be doing this history? It's up to us as Filipino Americans. We can't point fingers at the white man or the Black man for taking our history. No. We need to take it upon ourselves. And so tremendously, we started the taking oral histories with the work of Dorothy Cordova in Seattle and her husband, Fred Cordova. They founded the Filipino American National Historical Society in 1982. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary, and hopefully it'll be in Seattle. And I got a link down there in the chat that if you want to go and meet the creators of history, or even this movement, where we don't even consider, I happen to not consider myself as an Asian because of my dad. Back in 1970, that's when the term Asian Pacific American started. And prior to that, we had boxes like Oriental, Mongoloid, and other. And so when it came to the term Asian in 1970, I asked my dad, well, what do you think of this term Asian? And my father, you know, he's a very, very quiet man, but he's very, whatever he says, it's just tons of amazement or wonderment. And so he gave me an epiphany. He told me, never allow anybody to define who you are, because if you do, you will answer to anything. And so right then I said, okay, well, how am I going to learn the history? There's my dad. If anything, I wanted to get straight is this term, the brain drain. What's being taught in Filipino American history classes, I hear, is that the brain drain started in 1965. I beg to differ, because in 1898, the Philippines became a colony in the United States.
Right.
And then one of the things that they did, the Americans did, was they instilled infrastructure. They put in sewers, water, the roads, but it was school. education was the number one contribution for the Filipino. And that is, it's still in their mind was to become a better person, you have to have a better education. And so they started to build schools back in 1898 to introduce this American school system. But it took years and years to get schooling to all parts of the Philippines. And so about 1910, 1912, these schools started to reach the provinces or the rural areas of the Philippines where my uncles and my father lived. They weren't in the city. They were out in right out in the countryside. And when you start doing the math, they became the first graduating class of the American educational system. And there was also instilled was that in order for you to be even to even better yourself is to get a college degree. And to get a college degree, you have from an American university, that's gold. I mean, you could do anything you want, but when you go back to the Philippines. But Filipinos were nationals, so they didn't need a passport to come to America. All they had to do was get on a ship, a three-week tour on a boat, and that's how you get to America. But it costs money for that steerage to get on that boat. Ooh. And if you were a father, or who would you send? Because you had to sell your land, you had to sell some of your crops, you had to sell some of your animals, to pay for this steerage just to get your son out into this boat to go to America. So who would you send? Your laziest kid? Your dumbest kid? I don't think so. You would send your brightest kid, your most resourceful kid, and your most creative kid, because he's going to need some skills when he comes to America. And that's what I feel was the brain drain, was the first brain drain. My father here, can you believe this? A Filipino club at Franklin High School, 1928. He is 18 years old. Now, what's he doing at Franklin High School? Why do you think they had a Filipino club? You think they were teaching people about lumpia, pancit, folk dancing? I don't think so. But my father had to go to high school in order to go into college. That was one of the requirements. You have to graduate from a high school, an American high school. That was 1928. This is the reason why. Was because in 1927, November, that was the first anti-Filipino riot occurred in Yakima, Wapato. There was a mob that drove about approximately 100 Filipinos out from the valley. A lot of anti-Filipino sentiment, because they felt the Filipinos were taking away jobs from people. But the type of jobs that they took were menial labor, because when they came to America, when my father came to America, there was nobody to greet him or my uncles. So they would take any kind of job to just survive, because the only resources they had was each other. And that's all you need. That's all they needed, was a brother from their hometown, a brother from the Philippines. So you had this strong camaraderie, this strong community. And so they became houseboys. My father became a houseboy. Others had become dishwashers, menial labor. They worked in the canneries in Alaska, the fields of California. I asked my dad, where did you live when you first came to America? And he goes, what year? He didn't just live in Seattle. They went up and down the West Coast. These guys, had to go look for work, had to go from town to town, city to city, so forth and so on. But luckily my father, he was able to land in Corvallis, Oregon. And he worked as a houseboy, a dishwasher, a fraternity boy. But he got his degree in pharmacy in 1936. And that's an example of the brain drain where I feel started in the 1920s and 1930s. Now, these guys that came there, and the reason why I say that is because when I first came on the East Coast, I heard people, they were not privy to this history. This is back in 1982. There was this one prominent Filipino politician. I think she was the president of the Philippines. She made the statement that you Filipinos today are much better than the ones that came in the 1920s and 30s. And I said, wait a minute. And so there is this stigma within our own people that you are defined by what you do. I was never taught that. You are defined by what you are, not what you do. And what you are is to be respectful, to work hard, to build communities, to be a builder. It's easy to point fingers, but change starts within. This is the stuff not only my father taught me, but the ones that I worked with in Alaska. My manongs, those are my mentors. Those are my heroes. This is what they look like. Handsome men. All the ladies, they love this picture. Wow, these guys had style, pizzazz, panache. I had to look that up. Panache. I didn't know what panache was until uncle said, hey man, I got panache. So you do. Yeah, you do. But this, oops. But this is the picture I take pride in. They were shot at. They were run out of town. They were accused of raping white women. They could not live in certain parts of the city. Discrimination. Wow. They had it all. They had to take it all. But they held their heads high. They had each other. They were builders. And that's why I believe in Filipino American history, is American history, and take a look at America in the past. With that said, that's my presentation. Thank you. Now, how do I get out of here? Stop share. Okay. It is now 9:30. Oh, it's only 6:30 on the West Coast, but any questions? I see Cherry has a question, but no, you're not gonna ask no question here. We need to have other people question, and we have the honor, my honor, to introduce to you one of my mentors, Cynthia Mejia, who also worked at Roosevelt, and maybe she could chime in because in case you guys didn't know, or you guys, what was it? Well, go ahead, Cynthia. I was going to talk about your daughter being the most eligible bachelorette, or what was that?
I just want to make note that, yes, I'm a historian. I consider myself a historian. I was mentored by Dorothy Cordova. And I want you to also look up historylink.org. I did the site on Filipino Americans, especially the ones in Seattle. Ellen and I go way back. I was mentored to do oral history by Auntie Dorothy in 1976 for the Washington State oral program when we celebrated Washington's bicentennial. And I was lucky enough to work in the Chinatown ID at the International Drop-In Center, where a lot of the pioneers, the Manongs, were 70s, 80s, and they had stories. Their stories resplendent with labor union, going up to Alaska. And it was a very rich time of my life to learn their stories because my father had passed away in 1970. So I try to piece my father's story through them. Alan and I did this thing in Maryland, if you know, other, right? White, black, or other. So we did a workshop with preceded the Filipino American National Historical Society. We did a thing at University of Maryland, and the topic was black, white, or other. And so the reason why Alan and I were laughing is because that's what we were. We weren't white, we weren't black, we were other. And that preceded the, right now, if you do your census, there are so many different boxes now, right? So many different boxes. But when we were growing up, we were other. I want to say, as an educator at Roosevelt from 2003 to 2020, and I am a graduate of Nathan Hale 1970. So I bet Hale was whiter than Roosevelt. How about that? And as an educator, I would like to make reference to when I was teaching, we had clubs. And if you can instill in these students who want to be leaders of these clubs, and I'm speaking particularly because I was an advisor to the Filipino Club, to have people like Alan to go in there and talk about your history and encourage them to start clubs. Yes, the one time I had of course, we celebrated our Filipino club, and of course I had lumpia, and lots of people came in. And I talked to this one kid who was obviously mestizo. And I went up to him, I said, well, what's your background? He said, I think my grandfather's Filipino. I said, oh, what part of the country? He says, well, I'm not sure. I said, well, do you know when he came? He said, well, I'm not sure. Damn it. You know, you have to, as you parents, have to instill the history, you know, the background, you know, to your children. My children are mestizo, they're mixed white. They are now marrying white men. Yeah, my daughters, yes, one married the bachelor, Sean Lowe. And we were talking about identity, and their kids, if you look at my grandchildren, they pass, except for that nose. They pass, they could pass for white, except for the nose. Couple of them have dark coloring. And we were talking about identity. I said, you know what? You were so blessed to have my mother, their Lola, to be the prime example. You heard the accent. We all ate the food. We all joined Filipino youth activities, folk dancing. But as an American born, I have instilled with them, again, the history that Alan knows, the family tree as much as you know. It goes beyond the lumpia, the pancit. It's the heart and the reason and the story of why your parents, your grandparents, why they came to this country. And don't say, I don't know anything. Just think about it, you know, interview your relatives, piece it together. Make it your own. It's your story. And your children, your grandchildren have to know that story, because that's where you have their roots. That's the anchor. That's the foundation. That student who said he didn't know anything about his grandfather than he was Filipino broke my heart. Broke my heart. And I hope some of you feel the same way. Even if you're white or, you know, ain't black, you know, you all have a story, and tell your children, your grandchildren, your story. That's, yeah. And other than that, please come to the FONS conference at the Seattle University, August 11th to the 13th. We have 160 presenters, of which Alan is one of them. Learn how to do history. We invite you.
Thank you,
Great.
Cynthia. Oh boy.
Great.
Yeah. And it's like I said, I was very, very proud this Saturday because, like I said, even Filipino America was ahistoric. But now all of a sudden you get a battleship named after a Filipino, you know, a historical marker in the state of Virginia. Right.
Right.
Anyway, history is powerful because that is our proof that we are Americans too. And that's one of the things, not only do we have to face racism, we face Americanism. Yes, I don't speak the language. I can barely speak English, but anyway.
I'll
I'm
say
glad
one thing.
you-
We as Filipinos, at least I, for myself, we have been discriminated by Filipinos who came from the Philippines and look at us and say, you're not Filipino.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see people shaking their heads, right? I am as Filipino, not like them, but I know that I am Filipino. I may not speak Tagalog as much as you, but my parents not even Tagalog speakers. They're Pangasinan. So don't give me that.
Well, and also on the East Coast, when we introduced Filipino American history, there are a lot of these doctors and professors. They were laughing at me. They were calling, they said, oh, you belong to the hysterical society. I said, look, brother, first of all, I graduated from a university that has a football team. Where'd you graduate from? Yeah, you all don't even play football. So don't tell me. No, I'm not gonna go out. I forgot. I'm with elders in here. But any other questions? We only got what, 2 minutes left there, Joe?
Yeah. Okay, I just want to thank everyone for participating in this open discussion, especially our panelists. Outstanding information. I think we all learned a lot. Cynthia, I love your passion. I know you weren't scheduled to be or but I just love that passion. And what I keep hearing more and more again is family. We especially those of us of color, we have got to appreciate and understand the challenges that our parents, our grandparents, our great-parents, grandparents went through in order for us to be where we are today. We cannot forget that. But just some great presentations. Jenny, I would love to see you become a part of REAR and what it is that we're trying to do. Roosevelt has a lot of work, and we could definitely use your help with REAR, with that. Robin, okay, hey, we already know Robin. Robin's great, fantastic, love it. Teska, my goodness. My goodness. Wow. That's all I'm going to say. It's just wow. Okay. And my friend and buddy, Alan, smart, intelligent, passionate, considerate.
But I'm not black enough, man. I ain't black enough for you.
You my brother.
Okay.
You're my brother. Okay. But anyway, again, hopefully everyone got a lot out of this year, and we appreciate everyone participating, and again appreciate the panelists taking their time and preparing for it. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. A recording of this open discussion will be available later on our website. So if you want to go back and listen to it, yeah, you're able to do that. Okay. So Tony, I know he's traveling, so I think he probably lost his connection, so he's not here. Otherwise, we'd ask him as the other co-host of REAR to say a few words. But it's 6:37, so everyone have a nice day. Enjoy.
Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Okay. Hey, we got to talk. I love that passion. All right. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Yes,
Great
great.
seeing your faces. Hey, Maggie.
Wow.
Gary, I need to meet you. PTA. Hi. I want to come back around and meet you from Fernell. My student spoke at the
For now, yes.
Um,
Oh my goodness.
There,
I
my baby.
I love you. I've never met you, but I've heard wonderful things,
Oh,
and
love you already.
I just, and I hope your family is well. I understand that we missed you at convention, but
I know.
okay,
There's
wonderful. There we
there's
go. I'm
a number in the chat.
wonderful. Thank you.
Call me so we can talk, okay?
I will. I will. All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Love you. Bye.
Love you too.
Good. All right.
Wait, I'm
Take care,
saving-
everyone.
I'm saving.
Bye-bye.
There we go.